Welcome, my friends. Sit and listen to a story of a young schoolmaster in a village and the horror he faced as he tried to woo a local rancher's daughter. Contrary to popular belief, Ichabod Crane is a young itinerant schoolmaster with a passion for the supernatural. Lodging with a local rancher and visiting various local homes, he spent his time singing and eating and entertaining the young women of the area. Nearby, there is a local glen called Sleepy Hollow, with a legend about a headless horseman who is supposed to haunt it. A legend that will come all too true for Ichabod. All in The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Link to part 1 above. To continue to make content, we need to grow. So please like, subscribe, but just as importantly, comment and share. The algorithm must be fed, or else it will consume the channel. Comments are one of its favourite meals, and only you can feed it. In part 3, we learn more of Brom Bones, and Ichabod is called to a fateful social gathering. Come, sit, watch and listen, as it is time to enter the Cave of Chronicles. Such was the formidable rival with whom Ichabod Crane had to contend, and considering all things, a stouter man than he would have shrunk from the competition, and a wiser man would have despaired. He had, however, a happy mixture of pliability and perseverance in his nature. He was in form and spirit like a supple jack, yielding but tough. Though he bent, he never broke, and though he bowed beneath the slightest pressure, yet the moment it was away, jerk, he was erect and carried his head as high as ever. To have taken the field openly against his rival would have been madness, for he was not a man to be thwarted in his amours, any more than that stormy lover, Achilles. Ichabod, therefore, made it advances in a quiet and gentle, insinuating manner, under the cover of his character of singing master. He made frequent visits at the farmhouse, not that he had anything to apprehend from the meddlesome interference of parents, which is so often the stumbling block of the path of lovers. Bolt Van Tassel was an easy, indulgent soul. He loved his daughter better even than his pipe, and, like a reasonable man and an excellent father, let her have her way in everything. His notable wife, too, had enough to do to attend to her housekeeping and manage her poultry. For, as she sagely observed, ducks and geese are foolish things and must be looked after, but girls can take after themselves. Thus, while the busy dame bustled about the house, or plied her spinning wheel at one end of the piazza, honest Bolt would sit smoking his evening pipe at the other, watching the achievements of a little wooden warrior who, armed with a sword in each hand, was most valiantly fighting the wind on the pinnacle of the barn. And in the meantime, Ichabod would carry on his suit, with the daughter by the side of the spring under the great elm, or sauntering along in the twilight, in that hour so favourable to the lover's eloquence. I profess not to know how women's hearts are wooed and won, To me, they have always been matters of riddle and admiration. Some seem to have but one vulnerable point, a door of access, while others have 1,000 avenues and may be captured in 1,000 different ways. There is a great triumph of skill to gain the former, but still a greater proof of gentlemanship to maintain the possession of the latter. For man must battle for his fortress at every door and window. He who wins 1,000 common hearts is therefore entitled to some renown, but he who keeps undisputed sway over the heart of a coquette is indeed a hero. Certain it is this was not the case with the redoubtable Brom Bones, and from the moment Ichabod Crane made his advances, the interests of the former evidently declined. His horse was no longer seen tied to the palings on Sunday nights, and a deadly feud gradually arose between him and the preceptor of Sleepy Hollow. Brom, who had a degree of rough chivalry in his nature, would fain have carried matters to open warfare and settled their pretensions to the lady according to the mode of those most concise and simple reasoners, the knight-errant of yore, by single combat. But Ichabod was too conscious of the superior might of his adversary to enter the lists against him. He had overheard a boast of Bones that he would double the schoolmaster up and lay him on a shelf of his own schoolhouse, and he was too wary to give him an opportunity. There was something extremely provoking in this obstinately pacific system. It left Brom no alternative but to draw upon the funds of rustic wagery in his disposition and play off boorish practical jokes upon his rival. Ichabod became the object of whimsical persecutions of Bones and his gang of rough riders. They harried his hitherto peaceful domains, smoked out his singing school by stopping up the chimney, broke into the schoolhouse at night in spite of its formidable fastenings of wide and window stakes, and turned everything topsy-turvy, so that the poor schoolmaster began to think all the witches in the country held their meetings there. But what was still more annoying, Brom took all opportunities of turning him into ridicule in the presence of his mistress, and had a scoundrel dog whom he taught to whine in the most ludicrous manner, and introduced as a rival of Ichabod's to instruct her in psalmody. In this way matters went on for some time, without producing any material effect on the relative situations of the contending powers. On a fine autumnal afternoon, Ichabod, in pensive mood, sat enthroned on the lofty stool from where he usually watched all the concerns of his little literary realm. In his hand he swayed a ferule, that sceptre of despotic power. The birch of justice reposed on 3 nails behind the throne, a constant terror to evildoers, while on the desk before him might be seen sundry contraband articles and prohibited weapons detected upon the persons of idle urchins, such as half-munched apples, pop guns, whirligigs, fly cages, and whole legions of rampant little paper gamecocks. Apparently there had been some appalling act of justice recently inflicted, for his scholars were all busily intent upon their books, or slyly whispering behind them with one eye kept upon the master, and a kind of buzzing stillness reigned throughout the schoolroom. It was suddenly interrupted by the appearance of a black man in a tow-cloth jacket and trousers, a round-crowned fragment of a hat like the cap of Mercury, and mounted on the back of a ragged, wild, half-broken colt, which he managed with a rope by way of halter. He came clattering up the school door with an invitation to Ichabod to attend a merrymaking or quilting frolic to be held that evening at Minor Van Tassel's, and having delivered his message with that air of importance and effort at fine language which a man is apt to display on petty embassies of the kind, he dashed over the brook and was seen scampering away up the hollow, full of the importance and hurry of his mission. All was now a bustle and hubbub in the late quiet schoolroom. The scholars were hurried through their lesson without stopping at trifles. Those who were nimble skipped over half with impunity, and those who were tardy had a smart application now and then in the rear to quicken their speed or help them over a tall word. Books were flung aside without being put away on the shelves. Inkstands were overturned, benches thrown down, and the whole school was turned loose an hour before the usual time, bursting forth like a legion of young imps, yelping and racketing about the green in joy at their early emancipation. The gallant Ichabod now spent at least an extra half hour at his toilet, brushing and furbishing up his best, and indeed only, suit of rusty black, and arranging his locks by a bit of broken looking glass that hung up in the schoolhouse. He might make his appearance before his mistress in the true style of a cavalier. He borrowed a horse from the farmer with whom he was domiciled, a choleric old Dutchman by the name of Hans van Ripper, and thus gallantly mounted, issued forth like a knight-errant on a quest of adventures. But it is meet I should, in the true spirit of romantic story, give some account of the looks and equipment of my hero and his steed. The animal he bestrode was a broken-down plough horse that had outlived almost everything but its viciousness. He was gaunt and shagged, with an ewe neck and a head like a hammer. His rusty mane and tail were tangled and knotted with burrs. One eye had lost its pupil and was glaring and spectral, but the other had the gleam of a genuine devil in it. Still, he must have had fire and metal in his day, if we may judge from the name he bore of Gunpowder. He had in fact been a favourite steed of his master's, the choleric Van Ripper, who was a furious rider and infused, very probably, some of his own spirit into the animal. For old and broken down as he looked, there was more of the lurking devil in him than any young filly in the country. Ichabod was a suitable figure for such a steed. He rode with short stirrups which brought his knees up nearly to the pommel of the saddle. His sharp elbows stuck out like grasshoppers. He carried his whip perpendicularly in his hand like a sceptre, and as his horse jogged on, the motion of his arms was not unlike the flapping of a pair of wings. A small wool hat rested on the top of his nose, for so the scanty strip of forehead might be called, and the skirts of his black coat fluttered out almost to the horse's tail. Such was the appearance of Ichabod and his steed as they shambled out of the gate of Hans van Ripper, and it was altogether such an apparition as is seldom to be met with in the broad daylight. As it was, I have said, a fine autumnal day. The sky was clear and serene. and nature wore that rich and golden livery which we always associate with the idea of abundance. The forest had put on their own sober brown and yellow, while some tree of the tenderer kind had been nipped by the frosts into brilliant dyes of orange, purple and scarlet. Streaming files of wild ducks began to make their appearance high in the air, and the bark of the squirrel might be heard from the groves of beech and hickory nuts, and the pensive whistle of the quail at intervals from the neighbouring stubble field. Small birds were taking their farewell banquets. In the fullness of their revelry, they fluttered, chirping and frolicking from bush to bush, tree to tree, capricious from the very profusion and variety around them. There was the honest cock robin, the favourite game of stripping sportsmen, with its loud, querulous note, and the twittering blackbirds flying in sable clouds, and the golden-winged woodpecker with his crimson crest, his broad black gorget and splendid plumage, and the cedar bird with its red-tipped wings and yellow-tipped tail, and its Montero cap of feathers, and the blue jay, that noisy cat's comb, in his gay light blue coat and white underclothes, screaming and chattering, noodling and bobbling and bowing and pretending to be on good terms with every songster of the grove. As Ichabod jogged slowly on his way, his eye ever open to every symptom of coloury abundance, ranged with delight over the treasures of jolly autumn. On one side he beheld a vast store of apples, some hanging in oppressive opulence on the trees, some gathered into baskets and barrels for the market, others heaped into rich piles for the cider press. Farther on he beheld great fields of Indian corn, with its golden ears peeping from their leafy coverts, and holding out that promise of cakes and hasty pudding, and the yellow pumpkins lying beneath them, turning up their fair round bellies to the sun, and giving ample prospects of the most luxurious of pies. And anon he passed the fragrant buckwheat fields, breathing the odour of the beehive, and as he beheld them, soft anticipation stole over his mind of dainty slapjacks, well buttered and garnished with honey or treacle by the delicate little dimpled hand of Katrina Van Tassel. Thus, feeding his mind with many sweet thoughts and sugared suppositions, he journeyed along the sides of a range of hills which look out upon some of the goodliest seas of the mighty Hudson. The sun gradually wheeled its broad disk down into the west. The wide bosom of the Tappan Zee lay motionless and glassy, excepting that here and there a gentle undulation waved and prolonged the blue shadow of the distant mountain. A few amber clouds floated in the sky without a breath of air to move them. The horizon was of a fine golden tint, changing gradually into a pure apple green, and from that into the deep blue of the mid-heaven. A slanting ray lingered on the woody crests of the precipices that overhung some parts of the river, giving greater depth to the dark grey and purple of their rocky sides. A sloop was loitering in the distance, dropping slowly down with the tide, a sail hanging uselessly against the mast, as the reflection of the sky gleamed along the still water, as it seemed as if the vessel was suspended in the air. It was toward evening that Ichabod arrived at the castle of the Heer van Tassel, which he found thronged with the pride and flower of the adjacent country. Old farmers, a spare leathern-faced race in homespun coats and breeches, blue stockings, huge shoes and magnificent pewter buckles, their brisk, withered little dames in close-crimped caps, long-waisted short gowns, homespun petticoats with scissors and pincushions and gay calico pockets hanging on the outside, buxom lasses, almost as antiquated as their mothers, excepting to wear a straw hat, a fine ribbon, or perhaps a white frock, gave symptoms of city innovation. The sons in short, square-skirted coats with rows of stupendous brass buttons, and their hair generally queued in the fashion of the times, especially if they could procure an eel skin for the purpose, it being esteemed throughout the country as a potent nourisher and strengthener of the hair. Ron Bones, however, was the hero of the scene, having come to the gathering on his favourite steed, Daredevil, a creature like himself, full of metal and mischief, and which no one but himself could manage. He was in fact noted for preferring vicious animals, given to all kinds of tricks, which kept the rider in constant risk of his neck. For he held a tractable, well-broken horse as unworthy of a lad of spirit. So ends part 3 of the legend of Sleepy Hollow. In part 4, Ichabod attends the gathering, hopes high, but an unexpected twist has him leaving dejected. We currently release at least 3 episodes a week, more on weeks that we release a complete version or have a live stream. So check the channel page for more stories. Link above. If you have enjoyed the tale, it helps us if you let others know, so please click the like button. Subscribing will let you travel with us on future adventures, with the bell notifying you as we set off. If you want to join our band of intrepid explorers of the unknown, come visit us on Patreon, where we have a Discord server where you can share in discussions with both myself and the other members, and even help guide the live storytelling. There will be behind the scenes content, early access content, and options to guide which stories are chosen as the membership grows. There are even tiers to get your own stories produced, and a free tier if you just want notifications and updates. YouTube memberships will follow when I have enough hours. If you subscribe and watch, it will help. Please only join if you can afford to. The comments are like a book club where you can have a discussion on the story and what you thought about it. There you can let me know if there are any specific stories you would like to see produced in this format. I'm even open to suggestions on how I can improve the content. I try and reply to every comment, so your input will not be ignored. See the description for details of the Patreon, our other social media pages, and for a link to Canje Studios to find out about Arkham Horror and many other board games. Click on the end screen to subscribe, go to the next story in the series, or to hear about The Call of Cthulhu. Until next time, farewell. And remember that quite frequently you can tell the character of a rider by his steed.